Hello and welcome to India's World. The terrorist attacks in Brussels on March 22nd not only targeted the administrative heart of the European Union, but perhaps also the idea of the EU itself. The attacks came in the wake of similar events in Paris in November last. Already, nationalist forces in some of the European countries had been challenging the key principles of the EU, namely free movement of labour and visa-free travel. These voices are now only expected to get louder. The Brussels attacks are bound to lead to questions about intelligence cooperation within Europe, border controls, refugee policy, and eventually about the political and economic project of integration that the EU represents. To discuss the future of the European Union in the wake of frequent terrorist attacks, we have with us a distinguished panel of experts. We have with us Ambassador Dinkar Khullar. He was India's ambassador to Belgium and the European Union. He was also ambassador to Azerbaijan and Austria and permanent representative of India to UN offices and international organizations in Vienna. We have with us Ambassador Vivek Katju. He's a well-known commentator in the media. He's been India's ambassador to Myanmar, Thailand and Afghanistan. He retired as Secretary West, looking after Europe in Ministry of External Affairs. We have with us Ambassador Shivshankar Mukherjee, another distinguished diplomat. He was India's ambassador to Nepal and Egypt and High Commissioner to the United Kingdom and South Africa. I welcome you gentlemen to this discussion. Ambassador Khullar, let me begin with you. Do you think that every terrorist attack that takes place in Europe is another nail in the coffin of EU, as some people have suggested?
I don't necessarily share that view. I think that the terrorist attacks that have taken place both in France and more recently in Belgium represent a threat to Europe as an institution, but not to the European Union. Because the Europeans will actually, in my view, get strengthened by this. Those who are the pan-Europeans will get strengthened by this. Of course, it may pose problems for outsiders, but I think the institution of Europe may well get strengthened by this.
Okay. Ambassador Katju, after it was found that the Paris attack perpetrators were moving back and forth between France and Belgium without any check, France and some other countries introduced border controls. At that time, the EU had said that all such border restrictions would be lifted by 2016. Now, after the Brussels attack, does that seem possible, or do you think border controls will get stricter?
No, I think the natural reaction would be to have a stricter border controls. But there will also be an attempt at making a more comprehensive and more efficient intelligence policy. Because in Brussels itself, as reports have indicated, there is a multiplicity of police agencies.
Because there's the Flemish area and the French area, they have separate police forces.
So they have major problems of coordination. And unless there is seamless coordination among different security agencies, it is very difficult to monitor the activities of terrorists. And there are terrorists within the heart of Europe itself, not from outsiders. And it's not based entirely on ethnicity. So therefore, the European Union needs to have a good look at their intelligence cooperation.
Ambassador Mukherjee, Morgan Stanley has estimated that if you have tighter border controls, that will shave off 0.2% from Europe's GDP. Do you think European countries would be willing to forego a certain amount of economic prosperity for greater security?
Well, the expense involved in maintaining a seamless system of movement of human beings and material vis-a-vis the extra expense that will be involved in setting up border controls and making them effective. There is hardly any point in setting up border controls which are totally porous. So yes, I do see difficulties in that, particularly at a time when Europe as a whole is in economic stagnation. You recently had the Greek crisis. The economies don't seem to be reviving. So that already is a political constraint. And I see in the future, at least in the immediate future, nobody moving towards re-establishing the seamlessly open borders that used to be the case. You take a combination of factors. There's Brexit. There's the economic stagnation. There is Europe reeling under the refugee, exodus from the Middle East into Europe, which has, it by itself created.
But you're saying,
so many
therefore, that
problems.
that Europe will pay an economic cost and build border controls.
Well, that will be the intention. I doubt if it'll work because,
Well, if it's not going to work, then why would they forego economic benefits and still have ineffective
because
border
it will
controls?
be politically they will be forced to do this. You take the erstwhile Eastern European countries, all of them have come out very strongly against the Commission, while they are railing against the efflux of refugees into their countries. The mutual accusations are flying around. So I think they will do whatever they can. They've already built fences. They've already been users of barbed wire and constraints in virtually concentration camps and so on. So that is the way I see Europe going in the immediate future.
Ambassador Khullar, you've been in Brussels. Now tell me, why did the terrorists choose Brussels? Is it because it's the political capital of Europe, or is it because all the policing problems that are there in Belgium? They've had a jihadi presence for a long time in certain areas, and it was always a soft target.
I think on that, I would say that let's not just exaggerate the problem of the Flemish and the Walloon problem. Europe, by and large, and I think Ambassador Katju has already made reference to this, is pretty poor on sharing information and intelligence as they should be as a union. Brussels, the particular district where much of the problem originates from, is about 20%. Brussels itself is about 20% Islamic. And the threat from that particular district has been well known. It's nothing new. It was known even to us when we were in Brussels. But this is a problem which they have to handle. It's homegrown terrorism. It's not terrorism which has come from outside or been implanted. There have been cases of people coming from outside, but this is very much homegrown terrorism.
Okay.
And I think that is something that the Europeans have to cope with. My problem with the Europeans always has been that I used to lecture them that we seem to manage better than you, and with a much larger number of people. The Europeans are not very good at handling multiculturalism.
Okay, I'll come back to you, Vivek. We need to take a break at this point. We'll be back again in a bit. Stay with us. Welcome back. We're discussing the terrorist attacks in Brussels and their impact on the future of Europe. Vivek, Ambassador Khullar was saying that Islamic terror in Belgium is an indigenous problem, has been an indigenous problem. But let me ask you about whole of Europe. Is terrorism in Europe largely an indigenous problem, which is a problem of integration of the second and third generation Muslim youngsters whose parents migrated to Europe, sort of taking on the state? Or is it also linked to the conflicts in West Asia and in North Africa, where these youngsters go there, become fighters, learn how to use guns and explosives, and then come back and take on what they consider to be the enemy of Islam, whichever state they are in?
3 points. I think first of all, there was, and traditionally, a certain arrogance in the West, including in Europe, that terrorism per se was a problem of the developing world. It was not a problem that would afflict them. 2, there is, as Dinkar has correctly said, difficulties in integrating the Muslims who have come and this as immigrants for labor largely, and this is being manifest in the second generation more than in the first. But third, Western interventions in Africa have also led to the present situation. After all, the intervention in Iraq, the support to, after 2010, to the so-called Arab Spring in North Africa, all that has created a fertile ground for a symbiotic relationship now being established between the disaffected in Europe and the disaffected here. And that's a deadly brew which is leading to the refugee crisis, which is leading to the rise in terrorism among the indigenous disaffected. So it's a combination of these.
Okay. Master Mukherjee, it's not as if Europe hadn't faced terrorism earlier. There was the Irish Republican Army. In Germany, there was the Baader-Meinhof gang. Then in Italy, you had the Red Brigade. So how's this terrorism different from the previous terrorism that Europe has faced?
Well, in terms of the objective, which is to spread terror, fine, they are similar, but the sheer dimensions of the current wave of terrorism, I think, is quite different. The target of the Irish Republican Army was the British government. The target of the Baader-Meinhof gang was what it saw as rampant capitalism or whatever, their ideology forced them to agree. Today, as Vivek said quite rightly, look, to put it very simply, apart from reasons like the ghettoization of the Islamic community, the difficulties or the way that racism and xenophobia affects their lives and so on and leads to radicalization, but one of the central reasons for the current situation in Europe and perhaps elsewhere in the world is the quest by the West of Western domination by intervening violently and sometimes savagely in the Middle East in this particular instance, which leads to a blowback on their own countries. It's as simple as that. When Madeleine Albright was asked to comment on the 500,000 children who were supposed to have died, alleged to have died because of US sanctions, her response was that it was worth it.
Where did they die?
In Iraq, after the sanctions were imposed. So the thing is, the interventions in Iraq, in Libya, and now Syria have been one of the root causes of the blowback of terrorism into the countries which are seen to have been
that reasons I understand. I was only asking about the targets and the strategies of previous terrorist groups versus the new Islamic jihadi groups. Now, to me, it seems that the jihadi groups actually actively target civilians, which the previous groups didn't. They targeted state institutions. So, my question to you, Ambassador Khullar, would be:
all terrorists have targeted innocent people.
Well,
I don't think the Baader-Meinhof gang or the IRA confined themselves to state institutions.
No, there was collateral damage of civilians, certainly, but they targeted state institutions.
Well, the civilians didn't feel it was collateral damage. They were dead.
Yeah. Do you want to add something to it? Because I wanted to ask you that, is this deliberate policy of targeting crowded places, where civilians gather, airports and metros, is that because the ISIS strategy is that the more civilians you kill, more the racist backlash against Muslims, and therefore more the number of people they can recruit?
I would tend to go along more with your view than Ambassador Mukherjee's on this one, because I think the targets they have chosen, whether it was Paris, whether what is in Brussels, and I'm familiar with the places they have undertaken these incidents. I think there is a deliberate attack to aggravate the situation further. I think that is it.
Which benefits the IS.
Which benefits, in this particular case, benefits a particular group, the ISIS, as it may be. But not necessarily, I don't think it's in long-term interests of anybody. But the fact of it is that is the purpose.
Okay. Vivek, you had earlier said that there's no intelligence sharing in Europe. And there should be. Now, the question is, why hasn't there been intelligence sharing up to now? For example, the UK has, they say, some of the best intelligence services, the MI5 and the MI6. The MI5 and MI6 have a Five Eyes program where they share intelligence with countries outside Europe. The other four eyes are United States, Australia, Canada, and New Zealand. But they refuse to share intelligence with the Germans and the French and the Belgians. Now, why is that?
Look, I think you should also ask the question whether MI5 and MI6 share intelligence between themselves.
But one is the internal agency, the other one is external. And intelligence agency will have problems between themselves.
All
Forget that.
intelligence agencies have enormous problems of sharing information. Information is the currency they deal with,
But
and they
Vivek,
hold it very close to
If
their
they are
chest.
sharing with the New Zealand,
question is
with
what
Canada,
are-
why
no.
not with the European partners?
The question is, what are they sharing with the Americans and the New Zealanders and partners, outside partners, and what are they sharing with the Germans and the French? I think there's first a fear that what you are sharing will not be held, it will go away. Then there is an element of transactions here, that what are you sharing with us? So within Europe, the question of sovereignty has really not been addressed fully. And within nation states, the security apparatus is the last to relinquish elements of sovereignty. That is seen everywhere.
Then your advice is just motherhood and apple pie.
No, it is not. It is not. It is here where the political leadership has to play a role.
Okay.
And political leaderships in Europe, unlike some of our neighboring countries, are strong. If they want to crack the whip, they can. And then the intelligence agencies fall in line.
Okay. All right. We need to take a break again at this point. We'll be back again in a bit. Don't go away. Stay with us. Welcome back. We're discussing the terrorist attacks in Brussels and the implications for the future of the European Union. Ambassador Shivshankar Mukherjee, do you think European nations, after these terrorist attacks, would be now more willing to contribute weapons and soldiers to the coalition against the Islamic State? That they would commit aircraft, they would commit weaponry, they would go on surveillance missions from Turkey along with the
Well,
others?
the facts, if they do that, I don't know what the result is going to be. What you're saying is quite likely in the rush of, in the reaction generated by the terrorist attacks in these governments. They might just do that. But what have they actually done? Actually, in the last few days, they have totally submitted themselves to Turkish blackmail. They have upped the $3 billion aid to Turkey to $6 billion. Turkey has cheerfully blackmailed the European Union into accepting a fast tracking of a visa-free travel from Turkish travelers in the Schengen areas. The first visit to Europe after the Paris attacks by the Turkish Prime Minister, his first announcement was that this is the best thing that has happened to Turkey's quest for membership of the European Union. So, whether they will actually take the aggressive line of upping their intervention against the Islamic State and supporting a motley group of opponents which are about as bad as the terrorists, or whether they will try to buy their way to safety by bribing a country like Turkey. I don't think either way is really going to do anything unless there's a genuine thrust for peace in Syria.
Okay, Vivek, you've been shaking your head, disagreeing with him, but let me ask you this. How will the Brussels attack change all that Ambassador Mukherjee is saying? Will it not change the asylum deal between, the refugee deal between EU and Turkey? In the following manner, for example, now there's rising anti-Islamic sentiment in Europe, okay, that's a fact. Now, given that sentiment in the populations, can European nations allow visa-free travel as a quid pro quo for controlling refugees from Turkey?
No, this is precisely what I was coming to. I think, yes, at this stage, the Europeans are playing along with the Turks. But I cannot envisage a situation where Turkey will enter the EU or they'll allow them to enter the
Forget
EU.
entering EU. I'm talking of even free visa,
even
visa-free travel.
I'm coming to that. And I think diluting the Turkish presence, which is already very substantial, Turkish origin presence, is an underlying objective. So I do not see that the Turks, while they are playing their hand, will succeed beyond a point. In fact, the danger is that while Europe seems to be pandering to them, the Turks may overplay their hand and Europe may well find and try to find different ways of stemming this rot.
Okay. Ambassador Khullar, as anti-Muslim sentiment grows in Europe and the rise of ultra-nationalist parties, You have elections coming, general elections coming in France and Germany in 2017. Now, in the run-up to the election, is it possible that given the rise of ultranationalism, the mainstream political parties may move rightwards by adopting some of the elements of the agenda of the ultranationalist parties?
I think the ultranationalist parties are certainly going to gain from this. Whether whether Merkel moves is difficult to anticipate because it is unlikely. But elsewhere, it is quite possible that they will be moved. The changes have taken place in Europe, and right-wing parties are certainly emerging as important factors because of this. I think the major consideration always in Europe, however, is economic. Anything that touches on their economic prosperity is what worries them, which is why I think that the refugee crisis will still remain more important for them than the terrorist incidents. And any rise in expenditures, as you just were referring to, will still be looked askance at by a large portion of the public who see their own personal incomes having been affected over the last 10 years. I mean, take it from 2008 today, you still haven't recovered. Europe still hasn't recovered in GDP terms.
So what are they going to do?
I think what they will do is they will make some noises. They hope the deal with Turkey will work. I don't see, as Vivek does, I don't see Turkey getting much more than money out of this whole deal. But they will concentrate, go back to home as they do every day.
Vivek, you are again shaking your head.
No, I think yes, Europe looks at the bottom line, which is money. But they are very worried about social disharmony. And social disharmony is being caused not only by the refugee crisis, but also by these acts of terror. Because it is moving, public opinion is lurching rightwards. And let us not forget that there is a basic relationship between the refugee crisis, terrorism, and European interventions. So, at the moment, Europe is faced with a genuine crisis, and their leaderships are failing to find a way out.
Yeah. Ambassador Mukherjee, you were High Commissioner in the UK. Now, there is a movement in Britain to leave the EU, and there's going to be a vote in June. Do you think the Brussels attacks and before that the Paris attacks have strengthened the hands of those who want to exit the EU?
It's very difficult to say because both sides will use the terrorist attacks to buttress their own position. David Cameron has allowed his ministers to vote their conscience. And in fact, some ministers have already come out publicly for Britain's exit from the EU. Overall, the opinion seems to be that by a very small margin, the referendum will result in Britain staying in the EU.
My question was really, would terrorist incidents have any impact on that sentiment? Or do you think these ministers had already made up their mind about either staying in EU or getting out?
Most ministers, most people, I think, would have already made up their minds about, what they really wish for. But the terrorist incidents, being the kind of, seminal events which affect people's thinking on everything, will certainly be used by both sides to buttress their arguments.
Okay. So last question, really, we're running out of time. I just want to ask you, doesn't the recent sort of victory in the state elections of this Alternative für Deutschland, the party in Germany, show that even a country like Germany, which took such a radical stance on refugees, may actually be moving towards intolerance and towards ultranationalism?
No, well, Germans have been known to be quite ultra-nationalistic historically.
But Merkel was very generous.
Merkel has been generous. I don't see Merkel, I mean, this is my political call, but I don't see Merkel shifting ground greatly. She's had a long career.
But what about Europe as such?
Europe as such has been moving this way for the last, at least I can think of, for the last 10 years.
And that will continue?
That will continue.
So we are looking towards an intolerant European Union in the long run?
I think a sharp polarization. There is always going to be the left-wing liberals in Europe, but the right wing has been growing and will continue to grow.
All right, we've run out of time. I'd like to thank all of you, Ambassador Shivshankar Mukherjee, Ambassador Vivek, Katju, Ambassador Dinkar, Khullar, for participating in this discussion. That is all we have for you today. We'll be back again next week as usual. Till then, goodbye and thanks for watching India's World.